The gunshot echoed through the canyon like thunder, and Kade Keller felt the searing pain tear through his shoulder before his knees buckled beneath him. He hit the dusty ground hard, tasting copper and dirt as his vision blurred at the edges. The outlaws who had ambushed him were already riding off with what little gold he'd been transporting, their laughter fading into the vast South Dakota wilderness. Blood pooled beneath him, soaking into the parched earth of the Badlands as the September sun beat down mercilessly. His horse had bolted, his canteen lay shattered, and Kade knew with grim certainty that he was dying alone under a sky so blue it hurt to look at. The year was 1882, and this desolate stretch between Kuster and Deadwood had claimed countless lives before his. As darkness crept into the corners of his vision, he wondered if anyone would even find his body. When consciousness returned, it came in fragments. Pain, heat, the sensation of movement. Kade tried to open his eyes, but his lids felt weighted with lead. Voices drifted through the haze, one voice in particular, feminine and determined, speaking in sharp tones that cut through his delirium. He felt something cool against his burning forehead, then pressure on his shoulder that made him gasp and nearly slip back into oblivion. The woman's voice came again, closer now, urgent. Someone was fighting for his life, and he didn't even know who. The next time awareness found him, the light had changed. Golden afternoon sun filtered through canvas above him, and the pain in his shoulder had transformed from white-hot agony to a deep, throbbing ache. Kade's mouth felt like he'd swallowed sand, and when he finally managed to force his eyes open, the world swam sickeningly. He blinked once, twice, trying to focus on the figure moving nearby. A woman, small-framed but moving with purposeful efficiency, was tending to a fire just outside what he now recognized as a covered wagon. Her dark hair was pulled back severely from her face, and her simple calico dress was stained with what he realized with a jolt was his blood. "Water," he croaked, his voice barely recognizable even to himself. The woman spun around so quickly, she nearly knocked over the pot she'd been stirring. Her eyes, he noticed even through his haze, were the color of storm clouds over the prairie, a peculiar gray-green that seemed to assess him in a single sweeping glance. She was young, perhaps 22 or 23, with a face that might have been pretty if not for the exhaustion etched into every line. Without a word, she grabbed a tin cup and hurried to his side, sliding one arm beneath his head to help him drink. "Slowly," she instructed, her voice carrying a note of authority that surprised him. "You have lost too much blood to rush anything." The water was warm and tasted faintly metallic, but it was the sweetest thing Kade had ever experienced. He drank greedily until she pulled the cup away, ignoring his weak protest. "I said slowly, you will make yourself sick." She lowered his head back down onto what felt like a rolled blanket, and he realized he was lying in the bed of her wagon, sheltered from the brutal sun. "Who are you?" He managed to ask, each word an effort. "My name is Grace Jenkins," she replied, already turning back to her fire. "And before you ask, I found you yesterday afternoon on my way to Kuster. You were barely breathing and the vultures were already circling. Yesterday." He'd been unconscious for over a day. Kade tried to sit up and immediately regretted it as the world tilted violently. Grace was at his side in an instant, her small hands surprisingly strong as she pushed him firmly back down. "Are you simple in the head? You have a bullet hole in your shoulder and you have lost enough blood to kill most men. Lie still." "The bullet," he said, confused by the relative lack of pain. "I removed it." Her tone was matter-of-fact, but he saw her hands tremble slightly as she wrung out a cloth in a basin of water. "I am no doctor, but my father was a surgeon during the war. He taught me what he could before he passed. You were lucky the bullet did not hit anything vital, though it came close to the bone. Kade stared at her, this slight woman who had apparently saved his life with nothing but determination and half-remembered medical knowledge. You pulled a bullet out of me, alone. I had no choice, Grace said simply. There was no one else, and you would have died if I had left it in. The bleeding was severe. She returned with the damp cloth and began wiping the sweat from his face with surprising gentleness. What happened to you? Who shot you? Outlaws. 3 of them ambushed me in the canyon. I was transporting a small gold shipment for the mining company in Kuster. The memory made him clench his jaw, sending fresh waves of pain through his shoulder. They got away with everything. They left you for dead, Grace observed quietly. They nearly succeeded. Over the next few days, Kade learned more about his unlikely savior. Grace had been traveling alone from Nebraska, heading to Kuster where her uncle owned a general store. Her parents were both deceased, her mother having died in childbirth when Grace was young, her father 2 years prior from pneumonia. She had sold their small farm and packed everything she owned into this wagon, determined to start fresh in the Black Hills. She was 23 years old, unmarried, and possessed a stubborn independence that both frustrated and fascinated him. You should not be traveling alone, Kade told her on the 3rd day, when he was finally strong enough to sit up without the world spinning. These roads are dangerous, especially for a woman. Grace, who was mending a tear in the wagon's canvas cover, did not even look up. I am aware of the dangers. I found you bleeding to death on the side of the trail, if you recall. But I have no money to hire guards, and I will not let fear keep me from making my own way in the world. It is not about fear. It is about being sensible. Now she did look at him, one eyebrow raised. Is that so? And was it sensible for you to transport gold with no backup, no protection? How did that work out for you? Kade felt his face heat. That is different. How? I am a man. I can defend myself. You did a fine job of that, Grace said dryly, gesturing to his bandaged shoulder. Meanwhile, I am the one who saved your life, dragged you into this wagon, removed a bullet from your shoulder, and kept you alive for 3 days. But please, do tell me more about how incapable I am. Despite himself, Kade felt a smile tug at his lips. It was the first time he'd smiled in days. You have a sharp tongue, Miss Jenkins, and you have a thick skull, Mr. Keller. But there was the faintest hint of amusement in her eyes now. As the days passed and Kade grew stronger, he learned more about the woman who had saved him. Grace was educated, which was unusual for a woman in these parts. Her father had believed strongly in learning and had taught her to read and write and cipher before she was 6 years old. She could recite poetry and discuss philosophy, but she could also skin a rabbit, patch a wagon wheel, and apparently perform field surgery when necessary. She was a study in contradictions, simultaneously practical and idealistic, tough and tender, independent yet lonely in ways he suspected she would never admit. For her part, Grace found herself increasingly drawn to her patient. Kade Keller was 26, tall and broad-shouldered with dark hair and eyes the color of whiskey. He'd been working as a guard and occasional deputy for the mining operations around Kuster for the past 2 years, having come west from Kansas after the war had taken his family's farm. He was honest and straightforward in a way that was refreshing, and despite his initial patronizing comments about her traveling alone, he treated her with a respect that many men did not afford unmarried women. He listened when she spoke, really listened, and did not dismiss her opinions simply because she was female. By the end of the first week, Kade was well enough to move around the camp, though Grace still insisted he rest frequently. They had remained camped near where she'd found him, Grace reasoning that moving him too soon could reopen his wound. It also gave her a chance to rest her horses, repair some damage to the wagon, and though she did not say so aloud, enjoy having someone to talk to after weeks of solitary travel. "Tell me about your uncle," Kade asked one evening as they sat by the fire. The September nights were growing cooler, and Grace had wrapped herself in a shawl against the chill. "The one in Kuster." Grace poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkening sky. "His name is Joseph Jenkins, my father's older brother. I have not seen him since I was a child, but we have corresponded through letters. He never married, and his general store is apparently quite successful. When my father died, Uncle Joseph wrote and offered me a home and a position helping him run the business. That was kind of him." "It was practical," Grace corrected. "He is getting older and needs help. I need a place to live and a way to support myself." "It is a mutually beneficial arrangement, nothing more." "You do not believe in kindness for its own sake." Grace was quiet for a long moment. "I believe that everyone acts in their own self-interest, even when it appears they are being altruistic. My father taught me that. He said it was not cynicism but realism. That is a lonely way to see the world." She met his eyes across the fire. "Perhaps, but it keeps you from being disappointed." Kade wanted to argue to tell her that not everyone operated from purely selfish motives, but he found he could not. After all, what did he know of her life, of what had shaped her into this guarded, self-reliant woman? Instead he said, "You saved my life." What self-interest did that serve? Grace looked away. "I could not simply leave you there to die." "Why not? You did not know me. I was nothing to you. Stopping to help me delayed your journey, used your medical supplies, put you at risk." "Because it was the right thing to do," Grace said quietly. "And sometimes, Mr. Keller, doing the right thing is reason enough." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning neither of them was quite ready to examine. Kade felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. He had known beautiful women before, had even fancied himself in love once or twice in his younger days. But Grace Jenkins, with her storm-colored eyes and her fierce independence and her determination to do what was right even when it cost her, was unlike anyone he had ever met. 10 days after Grace had found him, Kade declared himself well enough to travel. The wound in his shoulder was healing cleanly, thanks to Grace's careful tending, and he could move his arm with only moderate pain. Grace had agreed, though she insisted on checking his bandages one final time before they broke camp. "You should keep the wound clean and dry," she instructed as she rewrapped the bandage with practiced efficiency. "Change the dressing daily, and if you see any redness or feel increased heat, see a doctor immediately." "Yes, madam," Kade said, oddly reluctant to have her hands leave his skin. She was standing close enough that he could smell the lavender soap she used, could see the faint dusting of freckles across her nose. Grace seemed suddenly aware of their proximity as well. She stepped back quickly, busying herself with repacking her medical supplies. "Well, I suppose this is where we part ways. You said you need to get back to Kuster to report what happened with the gold shipment. And you need to get to your uncle's store," Kade said, though the words felt wrong even as he spoke them. The thought of simply riding away from Grace, of never seeing her again, sat in his stomach like a stone. "Grace, I want to thank you for everything. You saved my life." "You have thanked me already," she said, not meeting his eyes. "Several times. There is no debt between us." "That is not what I meant." Kade moved closer, ignoring the twinge in his shoulder. "Grace, look at me." Slowly, she raised her eyes to his. In the morning light, he could see that they were shining with unshed tears, and the realization that she might be feeling the same reluctance he felt made his heart pound. "What is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Come with me to Kuster," he said impulsively. I mean, that is where you were headed anyway, and you should not be traveling alone. Let me escort you. It is the least I can do after everything you have done for me. Grace smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. That is kind of you, but unnecessary. I have managed fine on my own thus far. Except for the part where you nearly got shot helping me, Kade pointed out. Those outlaws could still be in the area. Grace, please. I would feel better knowing you arrived safely. For a moment he thought she would refuse. Then she sighed, and he saw some of the tension leave her shoulders. Very well, but only because it makes practical sense since we are heading to the same place, not because I need protection. Of course not, Kade agreed, unable to keep the smile from his face. Purely practical. They set out within the hour, Grace driving her wagon while Kade walked alongside. His horse was long gone, likely claimed by the outlaws or wandering wild somewhere in the Badlands, but he did not mind the walking. It gave him an excuse to stay close to Grace, to talk with her as the wagon rolled steadily eastward along the rough trail toward Kuster. The journey took 3 days, and they were the best 3 days Kade could remember in a long time. They talked about everything and nothing, sharing stories of their pasts, their hopes for the future, their observations about the wild, beautiful country they were traveling through. Grace told him about her childhood in Nebraska, about learning medicine from her father and Greek from her mother before the woman died. Kade told her about growing up in Kansas, about losing his parents and younger sister to cholera, about the loneliness of drifting from town to town with no real roots anywhere. On the second night, as they made camp near a small creek, Grace asked him, "Do you ever think about settling down? Buying land, building something permanent?" Kade was quiet for a long moment, watching the way the firelight played across her face. "I used to think about it all the time, having a place of my own, a family. But after I lost my folks, it seemed safer not to want those things too much. Easier to keep moving, not get too attached." "That sounds lonely," Grace observed. "It is," he admitted. "But so is wanting something you cannot have." Grace looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw his own longing reflected in her eyes. "Who says you cannot have it?" She asked softly. "Grace," he began, but she held up a hand. "I should check your bandages," she said, suddenly brisk and businesslike. "It has been a full day since I last examined the wound." Kade wanted to protest, to finish what he had been about to say, but he sensed that Grace needed the distance. So he sat still and let her unwrap the bandage, let her gentle fingers probe the healing wound. "It looks good," she pronounced. "No infection, and the tissue is knitting together well." "You have been lucky. I had a good doctor," Kade said, catching her hand as she started to pull away. "Grace, I need to tell you something." "You do not need to tell me anything." "Yes, I do." He took a breath, knowing he was taking a risk but unable to stop himself. "These past 2 weeks, getting to know you, I have felt more alive than I have in years. You are brilliant and brave and kind, even though you pretend you are only practical. You saved my life, yes, but you have given me something more than that. You have given me a reason to want to stay in one place, to build something real." Grace's hand trembled in his. "Kade, you barely know me, and you have been through a trauma. Sometimes people mistake gratitude for deeper feelings. You think that is what this is, gratitude." He lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "Because I am grateful, Grace, more than I can ever express. But what I feel for you goes far beyond that." "I cannot," Grace whispered, and now the tears were spilling down her cheeks. "I cannot let myself feel this way. I have a plan, a future mapped out. I am going to work for my uncle, build a stable life. I cannot afford to lose my head over a man I just met." "Who says you would be losing your head? Maybe you would be finding your heart." Grace pulled her hand away, standing abruptly. I am going to sleep in the wagon tonight. Try to get some rest. We should reach Kuster by tomorrow afternoon." She hurried away before he could respond, and Kade was left alone by the fire, wondering if he had just made the biggest mistake of his life by speaking too soon. The next day dawned gray and overcast, with the smell of rain in the air. Grace was quiet as they broke camp, speaking only when necessary and avoiding his eyes. Kade felt the distance between them like a physical pain, worse than the gunshot wound had ever been. He tried several times to start a conversation, but Grace responded with monosyllables and did not encourage further discussion. By mid-afternoon, the wooden buildings of Kuster came into view. The town had grown considerably since the gold rush, sprawling across the valley with a chaotic energy that reflected the diverse population of miners, merchants, cowboys, and opportunists who called it home. Grace guided her wagon down the main street, and Kade walked beside her, his heart growing heavier with each step. "Jenkins' General Store should be on the next block," Grace said, consulting a letter she had pulled from her pocket. "On the corner of Main and Pine Street." Sure enough, they found the store exactly where she had said, a solid wooden structure with large windows displaying various goods, and a painted sign declaring it Jenkins' General Store, established 1877. Grace pulled the wagon to a stop, and Kade helped her set the brake. For a long moment neither of them moved. "Well," Grace finally said, still not looking at him, "I suppose this is goodbye." "It does not have to be," Kade said urgently. "Grace, please, give us a chance. Give me a chance to court you properly, to prove that what I feel is real. Kade." Now she did look at him, and the pain in her eyes nearly undid him. "I am scared. I have spent my whole life learning to rely on myself, not to need anyone. The thought of opening my heart to you, of needing you, terrifies me more than anything." "I know," he said softly. "I am scared too. But I think the bravest thing we can do is try anyway." Before Grace could respond, the door to the store burst open and a portly man with gray hair and kind eyes emerged. "Grace, Grace Jenkins. Good Lord, child, I have been worried sick. Your letter said you would arrive over a week ago." "Uncle Joseph." Grace climbed down from the wagon and the man enveloped her in a crushing hug. "I am sorry for worrying you. There were some complications on the road." Joseph released her, his eyes taking in Kade, who was standing awkwardly nearby. "Complications? Are you all right? Who is this?" "This is Kade Keller," Grace said. "He was injured and I stopped to help him. Mr. Keller, this is my uncle, Joseph Jenkins." Kade shook the older man's hand, noting the shrewdness in his gaze despite his jovial manner. "Pleased to meet you, sir. Your niece saved my life. I owe her a debt I can never repay." "Is that so?" Joseph looked between them, and Kade had the uncomfortable feeling that the man saw far more than they had said aloud. "Well, any friend of Grace's is welcome here. Grace, come inside, you must be exhausted. And Mr. Keller, you will join us for supper, I hope. I want to hear all about these complications." Kade started to decline, not wanting to impose, but Grace spoke before he could. "He needs to report to the mining company about the robbery. I am sure he has a great deal to do." "The company can wait until tomorrow," Kade said firmly. "I would be honored to join you for supper, sir." Joseph beamed. "Excellent. Come, come. Let us get that wagon unloaded and your things settled, Grace. This is your home now, and I want you to feel welcome." The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. Joseph insisted on hiring some local boys to help unload Grace's wagon, and he showed her to a small but comfortable room on the second floor above the store. Kade helped where he could, though Grace kept trying to send him away to rest his shoulder. By the time evening fell, Grace's belongings were stowed away, and the smell of roasting chicken filled the air. Over dinner, Kade explained about the ambush and the stolen gold, carefully editing the story to make his own injuries seem less severe. Joseph listened intently, asking occasional questions while Grace remained mostly silent, pushing food around her plate. When Kade finished, Joseph sat back with a sigh. "Damn outlaws," he said, shaking his head. "Pardon my language, Grace, but they have been getting bolder lately. Sheriff Morgan does his best, but the territory is too large for one man and a few deputies to patrol effectively. I am glad you survived, Mr. Keller, and I am proud of my niece for having the skill and courage to save you." "She is extraordinary," Kade agreed, looking directly at Grace. "In every way." Grace's cheeks colored, but she still would not meet his eyes. Joseph, however, looked delighted. "Extraordinary indeed. Takes after her father, my dear brother William. He had that same combination of brains and backbone. Tell me, Mr. Keller, do you have family in Kuster?" "No family anywhere, sir, and please call me Kade." "Kade, then, and you must call me Joseph. So you are unattached, working for the mining company. Have you thought about your future, about settling down, Uncle Joseph?" Grace said warningly. "What? I am making conversation." But Joseph's eyes were twinkling with mischief. "It is a reasonable question. A young man should be thinking about his future." "I have been thinking about it a great deal lately," Kade said. "About what I want, what kind of life I want to build. And what conclusions have you reached?" Kade kept his gaze on Grace. "I have concluded that all the land and gold in the world mean nothing if you do not have someone to share it with. Someone who challenges you and frustrates you and makes you want to be better than you are." Grace finally looked up, her eyes wide and shimmering with emotion. Joseph coughed delicately. "Well, on that note, I think I shall retire early. These old bones need their rest. Grace, Kade, please feel free to sit on the porch if you wish. It is a pleasant evening." He stood, patted Grace's shoulder, and disappeared up the stairs with surprising speed for a man his size. For a long moment after he left, neither Grace nor Kade spoke. Then Grace laughed softly, shaking her head. "He is not exactly subtle, is he? He seems like a good man," Kade said. "He clearly loves you very much. I have only known him through letters for 20 years, and yet he welcomed me like a daughter." Grace stood, walking to the window that overlooked the street. "He has offered me a home, a livelihood, a future. I would be foolish to jeopardize that." "How would letting yourself be happy jeopardize that?" Kade moved to stand behind her, close but not touching. "Grace, I am not asking you to give up your independence or your future. I am asking you to share it with me." "You do not understand," Grace said, her voice breaking. "All my life, I have had to be strong to take care of myself. My father was a good man, but after my mother died, he retreated into his work, into his grief. I learned very young that I could only count on myself, and when he got sick, I nursed him for months, watched him waste away. I could not save him, Kade. All my knowledge, everything he taught me, and I could not save the one person who mattered most." Kade's heart broke for the pain in her voice. "Grace, when I found you bleeding on that trail, part of me wanted to keep riding. It would have been easier, safer. But I could not do it. I could not let another person die when I might be able to help. So I stopped, and I fought to keep you alive, and every moment I was terrified that I would fail again." She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "And then you lived, and you were kind and funny and honest, and I started to feel things I swore I would never let myself feel. Do you understand how terrifying that is? To let someone matter that much?" "Yes," Kade said simply, "because that is exactly how I feel about you." He reached up slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped the tears from her cheeks. "I am terrified, Grace. Terrified that you will realize you can do better than a drifter with nothing to offer but a dangerous job and a scarred shoulder. Terrified that I will wake up and discover these past 2 weeks were a dream. but I would rather be terrified and with you than safe and alone." "Kade," Grace whispered. "I love you," he said, the words coming easily now that he had finally spoken them. "I know it is fast and maybe it is crazy, but I love you, Grace Jenkins. I love your strength and your stubbornness, and the way you pretend to be practical when really you have the biggest heart of anyone I have ever met. I love that you saved my life not because you expected anything in return, but because it was the right thing to do. And I will spend every day of the rest of my life trying to be worthy of that gift, if you will let me." Grace stared at him, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Then slowly she smiled through her tears. "You are crazy," she said. "We are both crazy." "Is that a yes?" Instead of answering, Grace rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was tentative at first, almost shy, but then Kade wrapped his good arm around her waist and pulled her closer, and the kiss deepened into something that made his head spin and his heart race. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace was laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes," she said. "Yes, you infuriating man, I love you too, God help me, but I do." Kade felt like his heart might burst from his chest. He kissed her again, softer this time, savoring the feel of her in his arms, the taste of her lips, the way she sighed contentedly against him. "I am going to court you properly," he promised. "I am going to do this right. We will take our time, get to know each other without the threat of death hanging over us. And when you are ready, when you are absolutely sure, I am going to ask you to marry me. When I am ready." Grace pulled back slightly, one eyebrow raised in that way he was coming to adore. "How do you know I will not ask you first? You would not dare." "Would I not?" They grinned at each other like fools, and Kade knew in that moment that he had found what he had been searching for all these years. Not a place, but a person. Not a house, but a home. The courtship that followed was the subject of much gossip in Kuster. Kade proved to be relentless in his pursuit, showing up at the general store every day with wildflowers he picked on his way from his boarding house. He helped Joseph with heavy lifting and deliveries, earning the older man's respect and friendship. Most importantly, he spent every spare moment with Grace, learning everything there was to know about her. He learned that she hated coffee but loved tea, that she could recite entire passages of Shakespeare from memory, that she had a terrible singing voice but hummed constantly while she worked, that she was fiercely protective of those she loved, impossibly stubborn when she thought she was right, and capable of compassion that took his breath away. Grace, for her part, discovered that Kade was far more than the simple cowboy she had first taken him for. He was well-read despite his limited formal education, having taught himself from any books he could get his hands on. He was generous to a fault, often giving his wages to those less fortunate. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh in ways she had not laughed in years. And he loved her with a single-minded devotion that both humbled and empowered her. The mining company, grateful for Kade's years of loyal service and sympathetic to his injuries, offered him a position as head of security that involved more oversight and less physical danger. The pay was better too, enough that Kade started saving money with a purpose for the first time in his life. He had plans now, plans that involved a certain stubborn, brilliant, beautiful woman. 3 months after their arrival in Kuster, on a cold December day when the first snow was beginning to fall, Kade showed up at the general store with a nervous expression and a small box in his pocket. He had asked Joseph's permission the night before, and the older man had given his blessing with enthusiasm and perhaps a few tears. Now all that remained was to ask Grace herself. He found her in the store's back room, taking inventory of the stock. She looked up when he entered, and her face lit up with a smile that made his courage falter for a moment. How had he gotten so lucky? What had he done to deserve this woman? Kade, I was not expecting you until this evening. Is everything all right? Everything is perfect, he said, and was surprised to find he meant it. Despite the snow and the cold and the constant dangers of frontier life, everything was indeed perfect because she was in it. Grace, can you take a break? I need to talk to you. She set down her pencil, concern creasing her brow. Of course. What is it? Kade took her hand and led her to the small sitting area Joseph had set up near the pot-bellied stove. He had rehearsed this moment 100 times in his head, had planned out exactly what he wanted to say. But now, looking at Grace's expectant face, all his carefully prepared words evaporated. I almost died 3 months ago, he began. And I thought I was all right with that. I had lived a decent life, tried to be a good man. I thought if that was the end, then so be it. But then I woke up and you were there, and suddenly I had a reason to fight to stay alive. You gave me that, Grace. You gave me hope and purpose, and a future I had stopped believing was possible. Grace's eyes were already beginning to shine with tears. Kade, these past 3 months have been the happiest of my life. Courting you, getting to know you better, becoming part of your life here in Kuster. Every morning I wake up excited for the day because I know I will get to see you. Every night I go to sleep grateful that I survived that ambush, because surviving led me to you. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small box, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small diamond. Grace Jenkins, I know I am not perfect. I do not have much to offer except a job I am good at, a little bit of savings, and a heart that is completely and irrevocably yours. But if you will have me, I swear I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret saying yes. Will you marry me? For a moment, Grace just stared at the ring, her hand pressed to her mouth. Then she launched herself at him so hard she nearly knocked him over, kissing him fiercely as tears streamed down her face. Yes, she said between kisses. Yes, 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 I would be honored to marry you, Kade Keller. Kade slipped the ring onto her finger with shaking hands, then pulled her close and held her as if he would never let go. From the front of the store, they heard Joseph's voice call out. She said yes, I assume. Can I come back there now? They laughed, breaking apart just as Joseph appeared with a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. I thought we might celebrate, he said, beaming. Welcome to the family, Kade, officially. They were married in February of 1883, on a day when the snow sparkled like diamonds, and the sky was so blue it hurt to look at. The ceremony was small, held in Kuster's modest church with Joseph standing as witness and half the town in attendance. Grace wore a simple blue dress that Joseph had ordered special from Denver, and Kade wore his best suit, which he had purchased just for the occasion. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Kade kissed his bride with all the love and gratitude in his heart, and Grace kissed him back with a passion that made several of the older ladies fan themselves. Joseph had offered them the apartment above the store, but Kade had other plans. Using his savings and some money he had borrowed from the bank, he had purchased a small plot of land on the outskirts of town and begun building a house. It was modest, just 4 rooms, but it was solid and well built, and most importantly, it was theirs. Grace had cried when he showed it to her, and together they had worked on making it a home. Their first year of marriage was not without its challenges. Frontier life was hard, and there were times when money was tight or the winter was brutal, or Kade's work kept him away longer than either of them liked. But through it all, they had each other. They talked through their problems, compromised when necessary, and never let the sun set on their anger. They laughed together, cried together, and built a life together that was richer than either of them had ever dreamed possible. Grace continued to help Joseph at the store, and word spread about her medical knowledge. Soon people were coming to her for help with ailments and injuries, and she found herself acting as an unofficial doctor for the community. It was satisfying work, and she was good at it, but she never forgot that it had all started with a dying cowboy on a dusty trail and a determination not to let him slip away. In the spring of 1884, Grace discovered she was pregnant. Kade was simultaneously thrilled and terrified, and Grace had to laugh at how he suddenly became convinced that she was made of glass. He fretted over her constantly, insisting she rest more and work less, until she finally had to sit him down and explain that women had been having babies since the beginning of time, and she was perfectly healthy. Their son was born in December of 1884, during the first snowstorm of winter. The birth was long and difficult, and Kade paced outside the bedroom like a caged animal while Joseph and the midwife attended to Grace. When he finally heard the baby's cry, he burst into the room despite the midwife's protests and found Grace exhausted but smiling, holding a tiny bundle in her arms. "Meet your son," she said softly. Kade approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the tiny face peeking out from the blankets. The baby had his dark hair and Grace's nose, and Kade felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "He is perfect," he whispered. "You are perfect." They named him William, after Grace's father, and called him Will. He was a healthy baby with strong lungs and his mother's stubborn disposition. Kade proved to be a devoted father, waking for midnight feedings and diaper changes despite working long days. Grace watched him with their son and fell in love with him all over again. Joseph doted on his great-nephew shamelessly, closing the store early so he could spend time with the baby. He taught Will to laugh and played with him by the hour, clearly relishing his role as family patriarch. "I never thought I would have family like this," he confided to Kade one evening. "But then Grace came, and you, and now little Will. I am a fortunate man." "We are all fortunate," Kade said, watching Grace rock the baby to sleep. "More than we deserve." As the years passed, their family grew. A daughter named Catherine arrived in 1886, followed by another son, Robert, in 1888. Their house expanded along with their family, with Kade adding rooms as they could afford it. Grace continued her medical work, gaining a reputation as one of the best healers in the region. Kade rose to become one of the most respected men in Kuster, serving not only as head of security for the mining company, but eventually being elected as a town alderman. But despite their busy lives and growing responsibilities, they never forgot the bond that had brought them together. Every year on the anniversary of the day Grace had found Kade bleeding on that trail, they took time to remember how close they had come to never finding each other. Grace would check the scar on his shoulder, now faded to a thin white line, and Kade would pull her close and thank her again for saving his life. "You saved mine too, you know," Grace told him on their 10th anniversary. They were sitting on their porch, watching the sun set over the Black Hills while their children played in the yard. Will was 8 now, a bright boy who loved books almost as much as his mother. Catherine was 4, fearless and adventurous. Robert was just learning to walk, toddling after his siblings with determined concentration. "How did I save yours?" Kade asked, genuinely curious. Grace leaned against him, fitting perfectly into the curve of his arm. "I was so alone before you," she said quietly. "I had convinced myself that I did not need anyone, that independence was the same as strength. But you showed me that letting someone in, trusting someone with your heart, that takes real courage. You gave me a family, Kade, a home, a reason to open my heart and let myself be vulnerable. That is no small gift." Kade kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her hair. "We gave each other those things. We built this together." "Yes," Grace agreed, smiling. "We did." Joseph lived to see all three of his great-nieces and nephews, passing peacefully in his sleep in 1891 at the age of 72. He left the store to Grace and Kade, who ran it successfully for many years. They eventually expanded it, adding new inventory and services until it became one of the largest general stores in the region. As their children grew, Kade and Grace made sure to tell them the story of how they had met. Will, Catherine, and Robert all loved hearing about the ambush, the rescue, and the courtship that followed. "You mean Ma pulled a bullet out of Pa with no help?" Will would ask, eyes wide. "That is amazing." "Your mother is the bravest person I have ever known," Kade would confirm, smiling at Grace across the dinner table. "And the most stubborn," Grace would add with a laugh. "That too," Kade agreed. Their children grew into fine adults. Will became a doctor, following in his mother's footsteps and his grandfather's tradition. He went east for medical school and returned to open a proper practice in Kuster, where his mother gladly assisted him. Catherine married a rancher and moved to Montana, but visited often with her growing brood of children. Robert took over the general store, proving to have his great-uncle's head for business. As Kade and Grace grew older, they found themselves with more time to spend together. They would sit on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the world go by, grateful for every moment. The wild frontier of their youth was slowly being tamed, with railroads and telegraph lines connecting isolated communities and bringing the modern world to South Dakota. But some things remained timeless. The vast sky, the rolling hills, and the love between a man and a woman who had found each other against all odds. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, their children threw them a party that brought together what seemed like half of Kuster. Kade and Grace stood together, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, and marveled at the life they had built. "Do you ever think about that day?" Kade asked Grace later, when the party had wound down and they were alone. "The day you found me, all the time," Grace admitted. "I think about how easily I could have missed you or been too afraid to stop. I think about how close I came to losing you before I even knew you, and I thank God every day that I had the courage to try to save you." "You did save me," Kade said. "In every way a person can be saved. I was alive before I met you, Grace, but I was not really living. You taught me how to do that. You taught me what it means to love and be loved, to build something lasting, to have faith in tomorrow." Grace reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle on his weathered skin. "We saved each other," she said firmly. "And we built this beautiful life together. That is what I am most proud of, not the business or the house or even our wonderful children, but the fact that we chose each other every single day and never gave up on that choice." Kade pulled her close, holding her with the same tenderness he had on their wedding day. "I would choose you 1,000 times over," he whispered, "in this life and any other." As the years continued to pass, Kade and Grace remained devoted to each other. They faced the challenges of aging with the same determination that had seen them through so many earlier trials. When Kade's joints grew stiff with arthritis, Grace would massage them with warm oil. When Grace's eyes began to fail, Kade would read to her by lamplight, just as she had read to him during his recovery all those years ago. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary in 1933, an occasion that brought family from across the region. Their children and grandchildren filled the house that had started as 4 simple rooms and grown into something much larger. Will gave a speech about his parents' enduring love. Catherine played the piano while everyone sang, and Robert presented them with a photo album documenting their life together. As Kade and Grace looked through the album that night, they saw their younger selves staring back from faded photographs. There they were on their wedding day, looking so young and hopeful. There was the first picture taken of the three of them with baby Will. The opening of the expanded store, Catherine's wedding, Robert graduating from school, and dozens of other moments captured and preserved that told the story of their life together. "We did all right, did we not?" Grace said softly, her head resting on Kade's shoulder. "We did better than all right," Kade replied. "We did magnificently." Grace Jenkins Keller passed away peacefully in her sleep in February of 1935, at the age of 76. Kade was holding her hand when she left, and his last words to her were the same ones he had spoken so many times over their 52 years together. "I love you." The grief of losing her was profound, a pain unlike anything Kade had experienced, even including that long-ago gunshot wound. But he took comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the community they had built, and in the absolute certainty that Grace had loved him as deeply as he had loved her. He kept her photograph on his bedside table and spoke to it every night before sleeping, telling her about his day and how much he missed her. Kade Keller followed his beloved wife 15 months later, in May of 1936, at the age of 80. His children were with him at the end, and his final words were a smile and a whisper. "I see her. She is waiting for me." They were buried side by side in the Kuster cemetery, their headstones simple but elegant. The inscription read, "Kade and Grace Keller." Two souls who found each other in the wilderness and built a love that lasted forever. Their story became a legend in Kuster, passed down through generations. The tale of the cowboy who was shot and left for dead, and the determined woman who saved him with nothing but will and knowledge and courage. The romance that bloomed from that desperate beginning, and the family that grew from that love. People would visit their graves and tell their own children about the Kellers, about how true love can be found in the most unexpected places, and how determination can change the course of a life. The house they built still stood decades later, expanded and modified by subsequent generations, but retaining the core that Kade had constructed with his own hands. The general store bore the Keller name, run by their descendants who maintained the traditions of fair dealing and community service that Joseph, Grace, and Kade had established. And in the local museum, there was a small exhibit dedicated to Grace's medical work, including the instruments she had used to extract the bullet from Kade's shoulder all those years ago. But the true legacy of Kade and Grace Keller was not in buildings or businesses or museum displays. It was in the love they had shared and the family they had created. It was in the lessons they had taught their children about courage and determination, and choosing to love even when it is frightening. It was in the proof that sometimes the worst day of your life can lead to the best days, and that salvation can come from the most unexpected sources. Grace had found Kade bleeding and dying on a dusty trail in the Dakota Badlands, and with nothing but determination and half-remembered medical training, she had fought to keep him alive. But in saving his life, she had opened her own heart to possibilities she had never dared to dream of. And Kade, waking to find this fierce, brilliant woman fighting for him, had discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures are not the ones you seek out, but the ones that find you when you least expect them. Together, they had built something beautiful and lasting. They had raised children and supported their community. They had weathered hardships and celebrated triumphs. They had grown old together, their love deepening with each passing year rather than fading. And when death finally parted them, it was with the certainty that what they had shared transcended even that final separation. In the end, Kade and Grace's story was a testament to the power of determination, the strength of love, and the amazing things that can happen when two people choose each other and refuse to give up on that choice. It was a reminder that heroes come in all forms, sometimes arriving in calico dresses and covered wagons. And it proved that even in the harsh, unforgiving landscape of the Old West, love could not only survive but flourish, creating legacies that would endure long after the frontier had been tamed and the wild days had passed into history. Their great-grandchildren still told the story, gathering around dinner tables and campfires to recount how it all began with a gunshot, a woman's determination, and two hearts that recognized each other even in the darkest moment. And every time the story was told, it ended the same way, with Kade and Grace together, as they always had been and always would be, their love eternal as the hills that had witnessed their beginning.